Continuing Lecture 2, Circumscription of the Topic from the Varieties of Religious Experience. A Study in Human Nature by William James. And maybe this is going to be the third. Such a definition as this would, in a way, be defensible. Religion, whatever it is a man's total reaction upon life. So why not say that any total reaction upon life is religion? Total reactions are different from causal reactions, and total attitudes are different from usual or professional attitudes. To get at them, you must go behind the foreground of existence and reach down to that curious sense of the whole residual cosmos as an everlasting presence, intimate or alien, terrible or amusing, lovable or odious, in which, in some degree, everyone possesses. This sense of the world's presence, appealing as it does to our peculiar individual temperament, makes us either strenuous or careless, devout or blasphemous, gloomy or exultant, about life at large and our reaction, involuntary and inarticulate, and often half unconscious as it is the completest of all our answers to the question, what is the character of this universe in which we dwell? It expresses our individual sense of it in the most definite way. Why then not call these reactions our religion, no matter what specific character they may have? Non-religious as some of these reactions may be, in one sense of the word religious, yet they belong to the general sphere of the religious life, and so should generally be classed as religious reactions. He believes in no God, and he worships him, said a colleague of mine, of a student who was manifesting a fine atheistic ardor. And the more fervent opponents of Christian doctrine have often enough shown a temper which, psychologically considered, is indistinguishable from religious zeal. But so very broad a use of the word religion would be inconvenient, however defensible it might remain, on logical grounds. There are trifling, sneering attitudes even towards the whole of life, and in some men these attitudes are final and systematic. It would strain the ordinary use of language too much to call such attitudes religious, even though from the point of view of an unbiased critical philosophy they might conceivably be perfectly reasonable ways of looking upon life. Voltaire, for example, writes thus to a friend at the age of 73. As for myself, he says, weak as I am, I carry on the war to the last moment. I get 100 pike thrusts. I return 200, and I laugh. I see near my door Geneva on fire with quarrels over nothing, and I laugh again. And I thank God I can look upon the world as a farce, even when it becomes as tragic as it sometimes does. All comes out, even at the end of the day, and all comes out still more, even when all the days are over. And, of course, one's got to admit that the arguments about there not being a Christian God are not the same thing as there being no God, for the most part. Same thing with Christian claims to truth and what's good. Well, then you run into less of the difference, but still they're not all the same. Much as we may admire such a robust old gamecock spirit and a valetudinarian, to call it a religious spirit would be odd, yet it is, for the moment, Voltaire's reaction on the whole of life. Jamais vite is the vulgar French equivalent for our English ejaculation, who cares? And the happy term, Jetman, recently has been invented to distinguish the systematic determination not to take anything in life too solemnly. All is vanity is the relieving word in all difficult crisis for this mode of thought which that exquisite literary genius, Renan, took pleasure in his latter days of sweet decay and putting into quiddickishly sacrilegious forms, which remain to us as excellent expressions of the all is vanity state of mind. Take the following passage, for example. We must hold to duty even against the evidence, Moran says, but then he goes on. There are many chances that the world may be nothing but a fairy pantomime, of which no God has care. You must therefore arrange ourselves so that on neither hypothesis we shall be completely wrong. We must listen to the superior voices, but in such a way that if the second hypothesis were true, we should not have been too completely duped. If, in effect, the world be not a serious thing, it is the dogmatic people who will be the shallow ones, and the worldly-minded, whom the theologians now call frivolous, will be those who are really wise. I don't think we can go that far with that, but in umbrunc paratus, then, be ready for anything. That perhaps is wisdom. Give ourselves up, according to the hour, to confidence, to skepticism, to optimism, to irony, and we may be sure that at certain moments, at least, we shall be with the truth. Good humor is a philosophic state of mind. It seems to say to nature that we take her no more seriously than she takes us. I maintain that one should always talk of philosophy with a smile. We owe it to the eternal to be virtuous, but we have the right to add to this tribute our irony as a sort of personal reprisal. In this way we return to the right quarter, jest for jest. We play the trick that has been played on us. St. Augustine's phrase, Lord, if we are deceived, it is by thee, remains a fine one, well suited to our modern feeling. Only we wish the eternal to know that if we accept the fraud, we accept it knowingly and willingly. We are resigned in advance to losing the interest on our investments of virtue, but we wish not to appear ridiculous by having counted on them too securely. Fuel Detacha? Page 394, 398, abridged. I don't know French, so, I mean, I don't know French pronunciation. It's supposed to be easy, and I've never decided to learn it when I have the means right in front of me, right? Surely all the usual associations of the word religion would have to be stripped away if such a systematic parti pris of irony were also to be denoted by the name. For common men, religion, whatever more special meanings it may have, signifies always a serious state of mind. If any one phrase could gather its universal message, that phrase would be, all is not vanity in this universe. Whatever the appearances may suggest, if it can stop anything, religion, as commonly apprehended, can stop just such chaffing talk as Renan's. It favors gravity, not pertness. It says hush to all vain chatter and smart wit. But if hostile to light irony, religion is equally hostile to heavy grumbling and complaint. The word appears tragic enough in some religions, but the tragedy is realized as purging, and a way of deliverance is held to exist. We shall see enough of the religious melancholy in a future lecture, but melancholy, according to our ordinary use of language, forfeits all title to be called religious when in Marcus Aurelius's racy words, the sufferer simply lies kicking and screaming after the fashion of a sacrificed pig. The mood of a Schopenhauer or a Nietzsche, and in a less degree one may sometimes say the same of our own sad Carlyle, though often an ennobling sadness is almost as often only peevishness running away with the bit between its teeth. The sallies of the two German authors remind one half the time of the sick shriekings of two dying rats. They lack the purgatorial note which religious sadness gives forth. There must be something solemn, serious, and tender about any attitude which we denominate religious. If glad, it must not grin or snicker. If sad, it must not scream or curse. It is precisely as being solemn experiences that I wish to interest you in religious experiences. So I propose arbitrarily again, if you please, to narrow our definition once more by saying that the word divine as employed therein shall mean for us not merely the primal and enveloping and real, for that meaning, if taken without restriction, might well prove too broad. The divine shall mean for us only such a primal reality as the individual feels impelled to respond to solemnly and gravely, and neither by a curse nor a jest, but solemnity and gravity, and all such emotional attributes admit of various shades. And, do what we will with our defining, the truth must at last be confronted that we are dealing with a field of experience where there is not a single conception that can be sharply drawn. The pretension under such conditions to be rigorously scientific or exact in our terms would only stamp us as lacking in understanding of our task. Things are more or less divine, states of mind are more or less religious, reactions are more or less total, but the boundaries are always misty, and it is everywhere a question of amount and degree. Nevertheless, at their extreme of development, there can never be any question as to what experiences are religious. The divinity of the object and the solemnity of the reaction are too well marked for doubt. Hesitation as to whether a state of mind is religious or irreligious or moral or philosophical is only likely to arise when the state of mind is weakly characterized, but in that case it will be hardly worthy of our study at all. With states that can only be by courtesy called religious, we need have nothing to do, for our only profitable business being with what nobody can possibly feel tempted to call anything else. I said in my former lecture that we learn most about a thing when we view it under a microscope, as it were, or in its most exaggerated form. This is as true of religious phenomena as of any other kind of fact. The only cases likely to be profitable enough to repay our attention will therefore be cases where the religious spirit is unmistakable and extreme. Its fainter manifestations we may tranquilly pass by. Here, for example, is the total reaction upon life of Frederick Locker Lampson, whose autobiography, entitled Confidences, proves him to have been a most amiable man. I am so far resigned to my lot that I feel small pain at the thought of having to part from what has been called the pleasant habit of existence, the sweet fable of life. I would not care to live my wasted life over again, and so to prolong my span. So, none of that Nietzschean eternal recurrence, right? Strange to say, I have but little wish to be younger. I submit with a chill at my heart. I humbly submit because it is the divine will, and my appointed destiny. I dread the increase of infirmities that will make me a burden to those around me, those dear to me. No, let me slip away as quietly and comfortably as I can. Let the end come, if peace come with it. I do not know that there is a great deal to be said for this world, or for our sojourn here upon it, but it has pleased God so to place us, and it must please me also. I ask you, what is human life? Is not it a maimed happiness, care and weariness and care, with the baseless expectation, the strange swinge of a brighter tomorrow? At best it is but a froward child that must be played with and humored to keep it quiet till it falls asleep, and then the care is over. Page 314 and 313 are where the quotes are from. This is a complex, a tender, a submissive, and a graceful state of mind. For myself, I should have no objection to calling it, on the whole, a religious state of mind, although I dare say that to many of you it may seem too listless and half-hearted to merit so good a name. But what matters it, in the end, whether we call such a state of mind religious or not? It is too insignificant for our instruction in any case, and its very possessor wrote it down in terms which he would not have used unless he had been thinking of more energetically religious moods in others, with which he found himself unable to compete. It is with these more energetic states that our sole business lies, and we can perfectly well afford to let the minor notes and the uncertain border go. It was the extremer cases that I had in mind a little while ago, and when I said that personal religion, even without theology or ritual, would prove to embody some elements that morality pure and simple does not contain. You may remember that I promised shortly to point out what those elements were. In a general way, I can now say what I had in mind. I accept the universe is reported to have been a favorite utterance of our New England transcendentalist, Margaret Fuller. And when someone repeated this phrase, Thomas Carlyle, his sardonic comment is said to have been, "Gad, she'd better." At bottom, the whole concern of both morality and religion is with the manner of our acceptance of the universe. Do we accept it only in part and grudgingly, or heartily and altogether? Shall our protests against certain things in it be radical and unforgiving, or shall we think that even with evil there are ways of living that must lead to good? Well, if we look at the Devil tarot card, isn't kind of the point that, well, it's a choice whether evil and ignorance, or where you're going to put this, are not, or take this, or, can't really say one sentence for that, can we? If we accept the whole, shall we do so as if stunned into submission, as Carlyle would have us? Gad, we'd better, or shall we do so with enthusiastic assent? Morality, pure and simple, accepts the law of the whole, which it finds reigning, so far as to acknowledge and obey it, but it may obey it with the heaviest and coldest heart, and never cease to feel it as a yoke. But for religion in its strong and fully developed manifestations, the service of the highest never is felt as a yoke. Dull submission is left far behind, and a mood of welcome, which may fill any place on the scale between cheerful serenity and enthusiastic gladness, has taken its place. It makes a tremendous emotional and practical difference to one whether one accept the universe in the drab, discolored way of stoic resignation to necessity, or with the passionate happiness of Christian saints. The difference is as great as that between passivity and activity. The difference is as great as that between passivity and activity, as that between the defensive and the aggressive mood. Gradual as are the steps by which an individual may grow from one state into the other, many as are the intermediate stages which different individuals represent, yet when you place the typical extremes beside each other for comparison, you feel that two discontinuous psychological universes confront you, and that in passing from one to the other, a critical point has been overcome. If we compare Stoic with Christian ejaculations, we see much more than a difference of doctrine. Rather, it is a difference of emotional mood that parts them. When Marcus Aurelius reflects on the eternal reason that has ordered things, there is a frosty chill about his words, which you rarely find in a Jewish and never in a Christian piece of religious writing. The universe is accepted by all these writers, but how devoid of passion or exaltation of the spirit of the Roman emperor it is. Compare his fine sentence. If gods care not for me or my children, here is a reason for it, with Job's cry. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And you immediately see the difference, the anima mundi, to whose disposal of his own personal destiny the Stoic consents, is there to be respected and submitted to, but the Christian God is there to be loved. Well, for the most part, no. Isn't there the focus on the fear? Is something of the Psalms like, oh, well, I'm merciful and loving to those who fear me. And it's so little of a focus in the Bible, the whole love thing. So it's odd that people talk about, have they read the Bible? And the difference of emotional atmosphere is like that between an Arctic climate and the tropics, though the outcome in the way of accepting actual conditions is uncomplainingly may seem in abstract terms to be much the same. And in Book 5, Chapter 10, it is a man's duty, says Marcus Aurelius, to comfort himself and wait for the natural dissolution, and not to be vexed, but to find refreshment solely in these thoughts. First, that nothing will happen to me which is not comfortable to the nature of the universe, and secondly, that I need not do anything contrary to the God and deity within me, for there is no man who can compel me to digress. He is an abscess on the universe, withdraws and separates himself from the reason of our common nature, through being displeased with the things which happen. For the same nature produces these, and has produced thee too, and so accept everything which happens, even if it seem disagreeable, because it leads to this, the health of the universe, and to the prosperity and felicity of Zeus. For he would not have brought on any man what he has brought, if it were not useful for the whole. Now, we can, and even amongst the ancient stuff, there is the reference to Zeus and some of these other names, not as necessarily even male or any particular embodiment, but sort of beyond the personifications, you could say. But known through the universe. But we hear these words, Shiva and Zeus and all these, and we think of some statue or something else. That's not the whole picture, or not the root picture, really. For he would not have brought on any man what he has brought, if it were not useful for the whole. The integrity of the whole is mutilated. If thou cuttest off anything, and thou dost cut off as far as is in thy power, when thou art dissatisfied, in a manner, triest to put anything out of the way. Now, compare chapter 10 and 11, abridged from Winkworth's translation of the old Christian author of the Theologia Germanica. So compare the mood with that of the old. Where men are enlightened with the true light, they renounce all desire and choice, and commit and commend themselves and all things to the eternal goodness, so that every enlightened man could say, I would fain to be the eternal goodness, what his own hand is to a man. Such men are in a state of freedom because they have lost the fear of pain or hell, and the hope of reward or heaven, and are living in pure submission to the eternal goodness, in the perfect freedom of fervent love. When a man truly perceiveth and considereth himself who and what he is, and findeth himself utterly vile and wicked and unworthy, he falleth into such a deep abasement that it seemeth to him reasonable that all creatures in heaven and earth should rise up against him, and therefore he will not and dare not desire any consolation and release, but he is willing to be unconsoled and unreleased, and he doth not grieve over his sufferings, for they are right in his eyes, and hath nothing to say against them. This is what is meant by true repentance for sin, and he who in this present time entereth into this hell, none may console him. Now God hath not forsaken a man in this hell, but he is laying his hand upon him, that the man may not desire nor regard anything but the eternal good only. And then, when the man neither careth for nor desireth anything but the eternal good alone, and seeketh not himself nor his own things, but the honor of God only, he is made a partaker of all manner of joy, bliss, peace, rest, consolation, and so the man is henceforth in the kingdom of heaven. This hell and the heaven are two good safe ways for a man, and happy is he who truly findeth them. How much more active and positive the impulse of the Christian writer to accept his place in the universe is. Marcus Aurelius agrees to the scheme. The German theologian agrees with it. He literally abounds in agreement. He runs out to embrace the divine decrees. Occasionally, it is true, the Stoic rises to something like a Christian warmth of sentiment, as in the often quoted passage of Marcus Aurelius, "Everything harmonizes with me, which is harmonious to thee, O universe. Nothing for me is too early, nor too late, which in due time for thee, everything is fruit to me, which thy seasons bring, O nature. From thee are all things, in thee are all things, to thee all things return." The poet says, "Dear city of dear city of Kepros, and wilt thou not say, dear city of Zeus?" Book 4, 23. But compare, even as a devout passage as this, with the genuine Christian outpouring, and it seems a little cold. Turn, for instance, to the Imitation of Christ. In Benham's translation, Book 3, chapters 15 and 59. Compare Mary Moody Emerson's "Let me be a blot on this fair world, the obscurest, loneliest severer, with one proviso, that I know it is his agency. I will love him, though he shed frost and darkness on every way of mine." R.W. Emerson, Lectures and Biographical Sketches, page 188. "Lord, thou knowest what is best. Let this or that be according as thou wilt. Give what thou wilt, so much as thou wilt. When thou wilt, do with me as thou knowest best, and as shall be most to thine honor. Place me where thou wilt, and freely work thy will with me in all things. When could it be evil? When thou wert near. I had rather be poor for thy sake than rich without thee. I choose rather to be a pilgrim upon the earth with thee, than without thee to possess heaven. Where thou art, there is heaven, and where thou art not, behold, there is death and hell." It is a good rule in physiology, when we are studying the meaning of an organ, to ask after its most peculiar and characteristic sort of performance, and to seek its office in that one of its functions which no other organ can possibly exert. Surely the same maxim holds good in our present quest. The essence of religious experiences, the thing by which we finally must judge them, must be that element or quality in them which we can meet nowhere else, and such a quality will be, of course, the most prominent and easy to notice in those religious experiences which are most one-sided, exaggerated, and intense. Now, when we compare these intenser experiences with the experiences of tamer minds, so cool and reasonable that we are tempted to call them philosophical rather than religious, we find a character that is perfectly distinct. That character, it seems to me, should be regarded as the practically important differentia of religion for our purpose, and just what it is can easily be brought out by comparing the mind of an abstractly conceived Christian with that of a moralist similarly conceived. A life is manly, stoical, moral, or philosophical, we say, in proportion as it is less swayed by paltry personal considerations and more by objective ends that call for energy, even though that energy bring personal loss and pain. This is the good side of war, in so far as it calls for volunteers, and for morality, life is a war, and the service of the highest is a sort of cosmic patriotism, which also calls for volunteers. Even a sick man, unable to be militant outwardly, can carry on the moral warfare. He can willfully turn his attention away from his own future, whether in this world or the next. Personally, would not define some of these things in terms of whether you get your own way or not. He can train himself to indifference to his present drawbacks and immerse himself in whatever objective interests still remain accessible. He can follow public news and sympathize with others in others' public affairs. He can cultivate cheerful manners and be silent about his miseries. He can contemplate whatever ideal aspects of existence his philosophy is able to present to him, and practice whatever duties such as patience, resignation, trust his ethical system requires. Such a man lives on his loftiest, largest plane. He is a high-hearted freeman and no pining slave. and yet he lacks something which the Christian par excellence, the mystic and ascetic saint, for example, has in abundant measure, and which makes of him a human being of an altogether different denomination.